Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all doing well. Today I thought I would sit down and talk about The Boys. So I've just finished season 4. I watched the finale last night. Oh my god, still reeling from it. I absolutely love this show. I'm not going to say it's one of my favourite shows because I say that every single video, but in terms of modern shows, because I think all my faves are quite old now, but in terms of like new shows, it's definitely up there. I get really excited when a new season comes out every year, and yeah, just finished season 4 and I thought I would do one of my therapist breaks down TV show style videos. So I'm excited just to get into each of the characters, talk about my thoughts from a therapeutic perspective, obviously my perspective as a person watching TV as well, but I'm definitely going to try and look at the characters through that therapeutic lens. There's a lot to say about each individual character, so I'm going to try not to ramble on about each one, but there is so many different characters, so much to say. I'm really excited to get into it. I'm excited to talk about all the different themes. If you really like this video or you find it interesting, please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe to my channel because I make other videos about TV shows as well. I also do reaction videos, so please subscribe if you're interested in things like that. Please follow me on Instagram as well. I post a lot of reels over there about how to prepare for therapy, what to look for in a therapist, that kind of thing, so definitely check that out. And yeah, I won't ramble on. I want to keep this succinct for once. So I'm going to try and get to the point quicker, and there'll be timestamps down below if there's a particular character that you're interested in hearing my thoughts around. Feel free to skip ahead to that character. But we're going to start big today. We're going to start with Homelander. I feel like that is the character that most people talk about. There's definitely been some interesting discourse about Homelander this time around. I feel like maybe people didn't, I say people, like some people didn't realize that Homelander is the joke. He's incredibly powerful and scary. He's a great villain, but he's not the one to root for. You can like him, obviously, as he's such a good character. There's part of me that like wants the boys to kill him and be successful, and there's the other part of me that's like, we can't have this show without Homelander. So I totally get the fandom around him, but in terms of him being an actual character to look up to, I'm not so sure. And it feels like this season people have only just realised that, I think, because I think this season they've made it a bit more on the nose around the narrative and the themes and the message of the show. They've made it, I guess, more obvious. Some would argue it's always been obvious, but it's definitely been more transparent this time more than ever, that they're kind of in on the joke with the current political climate, particularly in America. If you are American watching this video, I would love to know your thoughts about that, because obviously coming from the UK, my perspective and the bubble that I'm in might, I don't know if I'm seeing that correctly, so I'd be really interested to hear what people think. But yeah, Homelander. So this season we see him struggling. We really see Homelander struggling, particularly with aging. So we see him collecting his grey hairs and keeping them in this like special drawer, which essentially has his like vulnerability in. It has a photo of, oh my god, I'm forgetting her name, the Nazi. Never thought I'd be saying that in a video. Stormfront. So he has a photo of like Stormfront, who obviously he loved or like claimed to love, so that's obviously a vulnerable part of him. He has, I believe, a bottle of milk which alludes to his sexual desires, his need to have a mother or a motherly figure in his life, his craving to be parented. And he has this jar of grey hairs as well, which for a being like Homelander, who is incredibly powerful, he seems impossible to kill. I mean, they've tried so many times. The fact that he is starting to decay, which we all are as human beings, we all are, but of course Homelander doesn't see himself as human, because in lots of ways he isn't. He's a superhero. There's a lot of conversation around superhero versus humans, but obviously what we found out in the show is that nobody apart from Ryan was born a superhero. They were all injected with V, so they were all originally humans. And I think Homelander really facing the human aspects of himself has been incredibly difficult for him this season. Very difficult to face, very difficult to accept. And realistically, the journey that he goes on is to disconnect from his humanity. So a turning point in the season for Homelander is when he has almost like multiple personalities. It really, the scenes with him when he's looking in the mirror really remind me of Gollum from Lord of the Rings. If you know, you know. I'm hoping people will know that reference, but basically Gollum has, you know, the parts of him that will argue, you know, the part that wants to stay loyal to Frodo and all of that, and the part of Gollum that wants just the ring and the power, fights against that version. So we're seeing a similar thing happen with Homelander, where there's multiple aspects of him really fighting against. There's the child, I would say, in him, the one that's really emotional, the one that's like, no, I love Ryan and I love, you know, and just wants to be loved himself. And I'll talk about his relationship with Ryan in a moment. But there's the real vulnerable part of Homelander that really is just craving love and attention and to be nurtured, essentially his inner child. There's also the Homelander that is all powerful, that sees him, that's completely narcissistic, that sees himself as a god, that is completely above everybody. Everybody is like a bug to him. So that like rage, and these personalities are all battling against each other, and he can't cope with it anymore. It's too much of an internal battle, as well as the aging process, his grief for Stormfront, the fact that it seems in a way quite lonely. He's surrounded by yes men as well, which is quite a lonely environment. We see that play out. Everybody like Ashley, for example, and the Deep, and all of those characters are like doing everything that he wants, saying yes to him, his every word. And I think that actually makes Homelander quite lonely, because nothing's really real. That's not a real connection. It's just pure fear. And there's the part of him that loves that. He wants people to be afraid of him. He wants to feel powerful. But there's the part of him that finds that incredibly dissatisfying, incredibly isolating in a way, boring as well. So again, there's that battle playing out. So what he decides to do, because it's too much, is to get rid of the humanity as much as he possibly can. How much he can do that is a question mark, but how he does that is he goes back in time. And he doesn't literally go back in time, but he goes back to where it all began, which is his childhood, when he was in a lab and experimented on and tested on and pushed to see his limits, pushed to see how far his powers can go. And we really, in that episode, get an insight into what Homelander's been through. It's an incredible episode, actually, where he's being objectively evil. He kills all those people in the lab, and he takes out his rage. He humiliates them as well, but you feel for him because you also get insight into what they did to him, and essentially it's revenge and cleansing himself. If I think about it from a therapeutic perspective, it's like almost exposure therapy in a way, or, you know, the kind of facing your fears, facing your history, and then letting it go. Now, we would never encourage, like if Homelander was my client, I would never encourage him to obviously do what he did, which is go back and take his revenge and wipe out that part of his life. But I would probably encourage him to face that part, maybe write letters to the people that hurt him. It doesn't sound as satisfying, does it, in a way? Really get out his anger, tell me how he feels about these people, really like get his rage out in a way that obviously doesn't harm like other people, because I do think his rage is valid. I think that's the hard part. His rage and anger is completely understandable with what he's been through. That he had no privacy either. Like, he had no room to grow up, to be a teenager, to find out what he liked sexually. There was a whole conversation around that. Always being watched. His pain threshold was tested. He was tortured, basically, as a child. And it is objectively awful. And we see there's that image of him with the blood after he's killed everybody and really faced it, where you really get that sense that he's done now with that part of his life. And now he's looking forward of like, what's next, and really feeling powerful and not caring and disengaged with the humanity and the pain that he's gone through. Whether or not he's actually healed would be a question mark. Like, everybody finds ways to cope with their trauma. Some are healthy, some are not so healthy. This definitely falls into the unhealthy category. How beneficial is revenge? Everyone's gonna have a different opinion on this. I think there's a reason why revenge is appealing. You're so angry, you're so hurt, you've suffered so much. Why wouldn't you wanna inflict pain on the people that have made you suffer. But there is definitely a question mark of like the long-term satisfaction of that. And I genuinely mean that as in a question mark. Like, I don't know. I think context is key. Maybe Homelander is healed in lots of ways, in the sense of like, he feels better. He's not suffering so much internally. Has that created more of a monster? Probably. Some would argue definitely yes. So that episode was incredibly insightful about Homelander. Something else that we see this season is him trying to reparent himself through Ryan. So this is a really interesting dynamic, I think. So Homelander, as I mentioned, you know, didn't have that parental figure. Obviously Soldier Boy doesn't exactly give him the love that he's desired. He was raised by people that just experimented and made him suffer, as we've just said. And a lot of parents in real life that go through a lot of trauma as a child do try to heal themselves through their own children. And it's a bit of a mixed bag. Sometimes it can be really healing to be like, now that I have you and I love you, I can't imagine doing that to you, you know, in terms of what I've been through. So I'm gonna change. I'm gonna break the cycle. I think the thing with Homelander is he doesn't really have the capability, unfortunately. Well, it's tough. There was a scene, wasn't there, where he was sort of encouraging Ryan to just do what he wants and to be in touch with his own needs. And I actually thought, not the encouraging him to beat up somebody, but that general concept I thought was quite productive around, like, instead of me telling you exactly what you should be doing, what do you actually think? Because he never had the opportunity. He had no choices in life. So there was a little bit of like reparenting there in terms of giving Ryan the opportunities that he didn't have, but it all kind of went out the window. Like, his jealousy of Butcher and the fact that Ryan doesn't sort of worship, his narcissism took over in a way, because the fact that Ryan, who I do believe cares for Homelander, but doesn't like worship him, and there's that fear, I think the flickers of fear on Ryan's face hurt Homelander in lots of ways. And obviously the relationship that he has with Butcher, it's such a threat that he then can't see beyond that. He gets really angry and he forces Ryan to do things that Ryan doesn't want to do, and Ryan is a bit of a pawn in the overall plan that they have in terms of like making that TV show and influencing children and things like that. So there's a desire there to be a good parent to Ryan for sure, but his need for power and to win and to be a god and to be the leader and to be the most feared and worshipped person on the planet, it just takes over sometimes. So the reparenting gets compromised because that totally overshadows it. Something else that is obviously really interesting about Homelander, going back to the theme of parenting, is that he does desperately want to be mothered. So his relationship with Firecracker is obviously interesting in that it's not sexual, it's not motherly either, but he is gaining something from that. And he doesn't care for her at all. You can, in the last episode, when she's like physically ill of what she's putting her body through in order to satisfy him, he's totally unfazed by that. But he's gaining that sexual gratification / being mothered by, but it's not real mothering, obviously. It's mothering through a very physical connection. It's through a physical way. It's so fascinating that it's like a sexual desire mixed with an inner child desire. Seeing that play out is so interesting, because really he does just want to be cared for, but nobody's been able to feel that except maybe Stormfront. And obviously, I forget her name, but the person from season 1. But even then, his desire, his rage completely took over in terms of that relationship, because in his experience, apart from maybe Stormfront, it's never been sincere. He's always being used in some way or worshipped almost too much, where it's not a real connection. So Firecracker he doesn't care for because he's not actually sexually attracted to her. He states that. And she doesn't really have much power in the room, and she's not looking after him. So it really is just that physical connection. And I mean physical in a non-sexual way. I mean through breastfeeding. The woman from season 1, I'm gonna have to put the name on the screen or something, because I can't remember her name. Fake fan over here, fake fan. Yeah, she was quite motherly towards him, but then of course he found out that she was lying. So it's insincere and it's a betrayal, and yeah, it all has to be on his terms. Stormfront wasn't motherly, it was more of like a actual relationship. So he's still searching. He's not found that figure that he's looking for. And I think that's such a big gap for him, that if he was able to heal that gap, he would probably be able to not only parent Ryan appropriately, but also heal and feel a bit less anger, and would be able to love a bit more, because one of the reasons why he's quite incapable of real love is because he's never received real love. That's just another really interesting element about Homelander. And I think the final thing that I want to comment on that I sort of noticed this season is his level of embarrassment and not wanting to appear stupid. I feel like that was a bit of a theme this season with a few characters, that it's not that he's not smart, but we had a few other characters this season who are smarter. So Newman, I would say, is very articulate, very bright, and obviously Sage is literally like the smartest person on the planet. So he really struggled with that. I found it really interesting when we saw him get emotional when he would make a big speech at that house in that room, and then Newman had to take over because the people around were like, what are you talking about? Like, that would be a coup, like, what do you mean? And he was like, kind of stuttering on his words. And there was a few moments like that where the embarrassment would be so strong that his point hasn't fully landed, or he hadn't thought something all the way through. I think even in the finale, there was a moment where he was like, yeah, I hadn't thought of that. And he doesn't like that feeling of embarrassment. Again, it's just classic seeing himself as amazing, or wanting to be seen as amazing, wanting to be worshipped in different ways than just his power. I think overall my point with that is that he is sick of being just worshipped because of being so powerful, as in like he can kill people in a second, he's so strong, he is this symbol for America. And I think what he wants to be respected for more than that. He wants to have the good ideas. He wants to be manipulative and have this like fully thought out plan that is executed properly. And what he hates is realizing that he needs other people for that, like Sage, like Newman, whoever. And I think that really gets to him. I'm just conscious that we've got loads of characters to get through, but that is my sort of thoughts around Homelander. Please let me know what you think about Homelander and your thoughts of him this season and where his story is going, and likewise for all the other characters that we're going to get into as well. So moving on to Butcher. Butcher had a really interesting season as well. So kind of similarly to Homelander, Butcher is really facing his mortality this season. He is dying. He is getting really, really ill. And he knows it. He knows that he doesn't have long left. And that is really difficult for a human being to face. We don't walk around often thinking or talking about death or the fact that we're aging. If we do talk about aging, it's very much in a way of like symptoms of aging, like not wanting to look our age, or things like wrinkles, or I'm getting a sore back, or that kind of thing. But in terms of actually aging, unless it's like your birthday or things like that, it's usually when someone else dies actually that we realize we're all going to die. And it's a bit of a strange realization. And I think when you're faced with your own mortality, if you're really ill, psychologically that is very intense for a person to deal with, very upsetting for a person to deal with, and of course very overwhelming. And we see Butcher wrestling with that the entire time in terms of what to do with his last moments on Earth, and kind of how is he going to play it, what's his next steps, etc. So obviously the fascinating thing that happens is he literally has an angel and devil on his shoulder. Now we don't know this the whole time. We think that the angel on his shoulder is the one that is in his head, that he's sort of seeing things, and that his wife who passed away, that's why we know it can't be real. But this other character who's the devil, who he's known from being in the military and things like that, is the devil on his shoulder. And of course for the majority of the season we think that he's real, and that he's kind of pulling Butcher in a direction that is more gets the job done, make sacrifices, we need to kill Homelander, we need to wipe out the superheroes. Whereas obviously his wife is more like, what about Ryan, what about these people? A more kind of nuanced approach, a more compassionate approach to the situation. So he's literally wrestling with these two as well. It's really difficult for him because there is a part of him, obviously both of those people are parts of him. So there is a part of him that cares for the members of the boys who are superheroes, who cares for Ryan, obviously, who was born with superpowers. He's trying not to care, but he does care. And then there's the part of him that obviously originally he just had one goal. He obviously thought his wife had died at the beginning of the show, and his whole point was just pure revenge. And it was almost more simplistic back then, before he built these other relationships. So there's part of him that just wants to go back to the simplicity of like, I just need to wipe out Homelander, whatever it takes. So it's a really difficult situation to be in. And he's got these two drives that are competing against each other. And of course, in the end, he lets the more powerful drive, which is the drive that is stronger, that wants revenge, that wants the simplicity, wants just the violent approach in a way, that one unfortunately does win and take over. And through that, he has to disconnect with his humanity, just like Homelander does. So they go on really similar journeys this season, where in order to achieve their goals and get to the end point, whatever that looks like, they have to lose part of themselves. They have to lose the part of them that's holding them back, which is their more human side. So that's where we end with Butcher. Moving on to Hughie then. Poor Hughie had a really tough season, to say the least. Lots to talk about with Hughie. All quite dark, sad things that happened to Hughie. First of all, his dad. What happened to his dad means that grief is a big part of Hughie's season. You know, they kind of lost touch anyway. He's obviously been preoccupied with the boys and his relationship and all the drama and chaos and action that's been going on there. You know, he feels guilty then when his dad has a stroke and then eventually it passes away, and poor Hughie, before he passes away, can't let his dad go. Like, his dad's been such a consistent part of his life, unlike his mum, which we'll obviously get to. But he's a big part of who Hughie is as well. So to let his dad go would be like letting a part of himself go, which is obviously very frightening. And again, it's a bit of a consistent theme around like the parts of us that we have and whether or not to hold on to particular parts. And in this case, unfortunately, it is the better decision to let this part of himself go for his dad's sake. He even wants to hold on to him by injecting him with V. He actually isn't the one to do it in the end. The mum does it, thinking that Hughie still wants to do it. But I even thought that was him already letting him go, of like, actually, this is not what I want. I'm doing this for selfish reasons. And then, of course, he has to completely let him go once his poor dad is actually suffering even more with having those powers and killing people and feeling really disoriented. And, you know, it's really, really tragic. So he has to live with that for the rest of the season, which is tough. Another thing, obviously, is his relationship with his mum and moving towards forgiveness there, which is not easy. Like, a parent coming back into your life after being abandoned is really tough. It was interesting, obviously, to hear her be very honest about why, in terms of her own mental health and how difficult it is to suffer with clinical depression and be a parent. Obviously, it's not to say that it's impossible and that all parents that suffer with depression are gonna have to leave. But obviously, in this specific story, in this specific case, she could barely look after herself, never mind a family. He seems very receptive to that explanation. You know, he's very empathetic, Hughie. He really understands, because I think even a lot of people would struggle. They might understand, but they still might not forgive. But he is actually able to heal, probably not 100%, but move forward with his mum. And I think obviously his grief plays a role in that. I think when you lose one parent, you're naturally going to look to the other who's just come back into your life. Be interesting what would have happened if his dad wouldn't have died. If he didn't die, then, you know, would that relationship form? Maybe, because his dad seemed to want the family to come together, and obviously they bonded over supporting the dad and clean slate and all of that. But yeah, I felt for Hughie, because it's not easy to have somebody just appear out of nowhere that you've not seen, that has missed so much of your life, your childhood, has not supported you in the slightest, and now is just here making decisions and looking after your dad. So I thought he handled it really well, actually. And obviously in his final speech in the episode, he even comments on, I can't do this anymore. I can't be violent. I can't be angry. And he mentions his mum, and he mentions the stuff that he's seen and the stuff that he's done. And you get the sense that Hughie, in a way, had the opposite journey of Butcher and Homelander, where he wants to let go that part of himself. He doesn't want the kind of, we have to do this, we have to do whatever it takes, tapping into his rage, tapping into the violence that has to be committed. He's now saying there is another way. There's other ways that we can do this that might be harder, but are better overall. And of course, unfortunately, it doesn't work out, but it's just interesting that his journey mirrors Butch's journey and ends in a different way, and obviously quite devastating. Another thing to obviously mention is that he also suffers a lot of, I don't know if I can say this on YouTube, but he was attacked in different ways. He was attacked in a sexual way on the show a couple of times and taken advantage of. I feel like that's trauma as well, that I don't know if we're going to see. I feel like The Boys isn't the type of show that will fully delve into that, but objectively that would be very traumatic to go through, especially whilst you're grieving for your dad. So yeah, my heart kind of went out for Hughie. I hope season 5 is a bit better for him, because that was not a fun season for him. So moving on to Starlight then. So Starlight, a bit like everyone else, had a very interesting journey this season. And really the messaging around Starlight this season was that she is inherently flawed. So the narrative externally is that Homelander's the devil and Starlight's the angel, and is, you know, full of virtue and wants to do the right thing all the time, and, you know, Homelander is the one that is just awful. And basically through Starlight this season, the messaging is a bit more nuanced than that, which is really interesting. So like through Firecracker, for example, we find out that she was a bit of a bully, that she wasn't very nice as a teenager, probably her own trauma with her mum and being pushed into these pageants, but just objectively it sounds like she was very mean. She just wasn't very kind to some of the other girls. And I sort of love this narrative because, I mean, of course she isn't this perfect person, but I could understand why Firecracker's so angry with her, because it's like you present yourself to be a particular way. And I think this is why media and celebrities and political figures, this is why it's all very messy sometimes, because everybody's put in a box. If you vote for one person, that means you have A, B, C, D beliefs. If you are at part of a particular party. Now, obviously, sometimes in a stereotypical way, it is true. Like, it is true in terms of people do fall into these boxes or these stereotypes or cliches. But obviously, it's not as simple. These people are human beings. They've made mistakes. They do things that you might not agree with or have conflicting opinions about. And I think the abortion storyline was also really interesting in that obviously the show was basically commenting on what's happening again in America in real life and how that is polarizing, and people on one side of the argument will really jump on that and use that to kind of disgrace the other person. And of course then anybody that is pro-choice will be getting more ramped up. So it's all about divide. It's all about creating divide as well. But I thought that conversation was handled really sensitively. I'm really glad that, even though I know people from a TV perspective probably thought it was a bit shoehorned in, which I understand, but I felt that it was really realistic, the fact that it got like leaked and it came out, because that's how the world works. Like, that was something that happened between them as a couple, and then like it's got nothing to do with Homelander or the boys or what's going on in their life. It's to do with their relationship. So the fact that we didn't see her finding out she was pregnant and having that conversation with Hughie, actually in lots of ways makes more sense. And of course the way it was brought up also makes sense with the political climate of the show as well as in real life. So I thought it was handled quite sensitively and really, you know, gave that message to the viewer around, this is supposed to be private, this is supposed to be between Starlight and her partner, but because she's a political figure or a celebrity, a superhero, it's up for debate, it's up for the conversation, it's up for entertainment, and it's up for ridicule as well. So that was a really interesting thing that happened in regards to Starlight and around her flawed. Me saying that she had an abortion, by the way, isn't me saying that she is flawed because of that, but what I mean is there's more going on with somebody than what meets the eye. Like we see, like, even the costume and what it represents, and actually Starlight's and actually Annie is a human being that was a bully as a kid and is in a relationship and had an abortion and has a strained relationship with her mum and all of the different things, and, you know, isn't perfect, is not a perfect person. So essentially what I'm saying is, with Homelander as well, as Starlight and Homelander are both more nuanced than their brand. Their brand is a particular way, but both of them have more to them. And obviously Starlight has to kind of face her flawed self quite literally through the shapeshifter. So again, it's not to say the shapeshifter represents all of the mistakes that, and I want to be really clear that when I say mistake, like, I'm not talking about everything. I'm just talking about like anything that could be deemed as a mistake from either Starlight's perspective or other people's. She has to face everything, basically, face herself, literally, look herself in the eye, and they fight. And I thought it was quite symbolic, really, of her season, her kind of tackling the part of herself that she doesn't like, which is probably the bully that, you know, from back in the day, or the person that doesn't really know what she's doing, doesn't really know who to be. Is she Starlight? Is she Annie? I thought that finale episode was really clever in the way that they brought that to a head, and obviously she won and was able to defeat the shapeshifter. Moving on to Frenchie then, who is probably my favourite character. So obviously the first thing to say about Frenchie is that it was good bisexuality representation. I don't actually know if bisexual is the term that he would use to describe himself, but certainly we had queer representation in the show this season, and you know, he's attracted to obviously multiple types of people, so that was really cool to see. What the main theme for Frenchie was guilt and shame this season. He really, through the relationship that he has with this man who was a child of a family of victims of Frenchie. So when Frenchie was somebody who would like assassinate people and kill people, unfortunately this person's family were a few of the victims, so he realizes that and has to live with that and can't cope with it. He literally cannot carry the weight of that shame, that guilt. He starts to hate himself, like really hate himself as a person. Obviously eventually he confesses, not only to the person himself, but then he takes himself to prison and hands himself in and shuts himself off. He won't receive visitors, and it's quite tragic. I quite admire it. I think that is what accountability is. Often we see people say that they're sorry for their actions, but it's like, well, if you were really sorry, you would hand yourself in, or you would accept the punishment, or you would try and make it better in some way. So this shows that the remorse is really there, because he's like, actually, I don't care what happens to me. I deserve to be punished. I deserve to do time for my crime. So we see him go on this journey of, you know, self-hatred. He also self-medicates as well to cope. So we see him kind of using drugs and drinking and things like that to cope, because it's like a pure escapism. He's struggling so much with the guilt and the shame and what he's done and the PTSD. I would go as far as saying it's probably PTSD, because he sees things as well. He has flashbacks. So he really starts to struggle big time, and of course he self-medicates to cope with that, and he's punishing himself. And then what's quite nice is at the end there is forgiveness there. Obviously he, for the sake of the show, he gets brought out of prison, so it's not a very long sentence, but he comes out, and then he obviously is wanting to help. Through his relationship with Kimiko, it's starting to heal, because she's going through a similar thing. Obviously I'll talk about her, but she's going through a similar thing, and he loves her and really cares for her and doesn't want her to suffer. And she basically points out that, you know, we're in this together. Like, yes, you don't, it's kind of like the classic thing of like, you don't take your own advice. So he obviously wants her to forgive herself and to heal, but she's looking at him like, but you're not doing that for you. You also deserve it. So I think through their connection, hopefully they're in the next season kind of going on a healing journey together. And I feel like we already saw that near the end of the season. So moving on to Kimiko, who, you know, I've already just mentioned, is also struggling with guilt and shame and the past. And her story is really interesting because she's had a real physical reaction to her trauma and to her guilt and what she's done. And it's self-punishment to the extreme. So she quite literally loses her ability to speak and to communicate because, obviously as a child, when you're still developing, she's being made to fight and to kill, and she's not allowed to scream or to express any kind of pain. So that was drilled into her, and through the fear of not doing that and the guilt of actually being successful and, you know, killing other people, she quite literally then can't speak. So it's like this very strong trauma response that is mixed with like self-punishment, because she probably doesn't feel like she deserves to speak, and fear, because when you're told you can't do something and if you do you'll die, as a child it's gonna get locked in. So her not speaking got completely locked in at that age, and then obviously hasn't shifted since, which is really tragic. So we see her on a very similar journey to Frenchie, where she's wrestling with that. And again, I think through her love for him and seeing how much he's suffering, she spends the whole season really concerned about him, around his self-medicating when he takes himself to prison, the fact that, you know, she feels a bit abandoned by him as well. And I think through that, she's able to look inward and sort of, again, she doesn't want him to suffer and to punish himself forever. So likewise, she starts to forgive herself a bit. She also comes face to face with one of the girls she attacked, which I think for the most part is very triggering and really difficult for her to come head to head with, but also is kind of a shift as well in that direction of healing, because she has to face it. There's a lot of characters having to face themselves in this season, and that's another really good example where she kind of doesn't have a choice, she has to face it. And then of course in the last episode, through her love for Frenchie and concern, she's able to release the sound, and she's finally, it's almost like the love that she has for him overtakes the fear that was locked in as a child, and she screams and makes a noise, and I actually found that very moving. There was a lot going on in that moment as well that was quite emotional, but I thought, wow, oh my god, she's actually been able to speak, she's actually been able to express herself. So it'd be really interesting to see next season how that kind of folds. Was that just one moment? Can she talk now? I'm gonna miss the little emojis and the text though, because they're so funny. Like when they kissed and she showed Starlight the kiss emoji and the French flag, I was like, oh my god, obsessed. And I love that she realised as well that she does deserve love, because I think both of them go through that this season, or they don't think that they deserve love, and again, because they love each other, they're able to teach each other that they do deserve love. So it was really, really sweet. Okay, going back to Vought and some of the superheroes then. So I want to touch on A-Train, obviously. A-Train had some major character development this season. Extremely interesting. I think he had it up to here with the BS. He is sick of the falseness. There's something about, like, he probably got into this to be an actual hero. He wants his nephews to actually look up to him. He wants his brother to care for him again, love him again. And he lost all of that because the stories aren't real. He's not actually saved anyone. So his sense of self is on the floor. There's also a lot of racial stereotypes and microaggressions, or just blatant racism, actually. I don't even know if microaggressions covers it, that happens in his world. Like the movie he has to make of, like, he's a drug dealer on the streets and now he's being pulled from that and is a superhero. And yeah, it's all, there's only so much a person can take. And I think A-Train this season was like, I feel like nothing. You could tell he was so deflated. He like wasn't really expressing himself at the beginning of the season, just seemed very like monotone in a way. And Butcher gives him an opportunity to be a person again, like have some sort of sense of identity, like actually do something that is productive, that helps. And so that he obviously gets flipped and he supports the boys, which is really risky, but worth it for him just for his overall sense of self. Obviously scary, but at least he's got kind of nothing to lose at this point as well. I think when you're that lonely and isolated in Vought, it's like, well, he doesn't have friends there. His family don't speak to him. What does he have to lose? So I loved that for him. I loved that he was like, you know what, actually, I'm just going to go for it. I'm going to take the risk. He wanted to make amends to Hughie as well for obviously killing his girlfriend. So yeah, massive character development there. I really did think he was going to be a goner, I'll be honest. I thought, oh, anytime you see a character developing, I think they're going to die. But he actually escaped. So really interesting to see what happens there. Is he going to come back? Is that his storyline done? I have no idea, but I'm glad he actually got to feel like a hero. That scene where he carries the person to the hospital and the kid looked up at him, you could tell in his face that he's like, finally, like I'm being seen properly, not just like this figure or brand or face that is just being used, part of this like gross bigger picture. It was actually somebody admiring him. He probably hasn't felt admired in a really long time. So yeah, I was really happy for A-Train and to see his character developing. There was a lack of development when it comes to the Deep. So switching over then to the Deep, who is such a, you know, interesting, funny, I think the performance from Chase Crawford is so good because there's a lot of acting with props, I imagine, or just a green screen with, you know, the octopus and stuff like that. So the performance is amazing, but the Deep as a character is like, oh my God. And again, the theme of the Deep is he just wants to feel important. He wants to feel, he's very similar to Homelander, except just not as smart and not as powerful and not as respected. But he wants to feel superior. He wants to feel like he is smart. He wants people to admire him, to look up to him, but he's going about it in, you know, the opposite to A-Train. He's going about it in the complete wrong way. He's just so afraid of Homelander that he's one of like the yes men around him that will just kill for him, do whatever he wants. And he even sacrificed the one real, can't believe I'm saying this, but the one real relationship that he did have with the squid or the octopus, he even betrays her. If I try and see that as a real relationship, then that's quite as significant that he even sacrificed her just to maintain his position in the team, which is kind of pathetic, really, in terms of like, what does he have except for this desperate need to be in the Seven and to be seen as important. So yeah, I'm still kind of rooting for him. We'll see what happens. He's kind of done too much though to really root for him. He's not a good person, is he? So maybe I'm just being too optimistic here, but I feel like as a therapist, you have to be hopeful for the redemption of all people. So we'll see what happens with the Deep next time. This season was just him being back on his awful self. So a new character that we have this season is Sage. Sage was so interesting to have intelligence as a superpower. I was like, she's gonna die. These people can fight, these people can punch people in the heads and they explode. Like, the violence in the show is often shocking, and they're all incredibly powerful beings that can actually fight. And Sage isn't that, but she's so smart that it was fascinating to watch how she manipulates everybody, how she does survive, how she's able to connect with Homelander of all people. Homelander is a racist. He doesn't respect women. He doesn't really respect intelligence because he's quite envious of it. So how she was able to bond with him and get respect from him and for him to actually listen to her, I'm like, how did she do that? Like, it is fascinating. She's also terrifying because she has no motive, really, other than being that smart. I must think she has high levels of boredom. She's probably read every single book. She's learned everything. She's done so many different kinds of experiments. She's created things. She's invented things. She's running out of things to do. This is what my take is, that I genuinely think that she's ran out of things to do and this is like a project for her. Let's take over. Let's get Homelander to be the most powerful person, because why not? And maybe she kind of likes him. I don't know, maybe there's something about him that she actually quite likes. It's hard to say, but it's really rooted in boredom because she's so smart that, and she even says in the last episode, I wanted to see if I can. That's it, that's the motive. So I'm really excited that she didn't die, even though I was like, how is this like possible? And see where her character goes. But yeah, it really got me thinking about highly intelligent people and what they might go through, which I don't know if that sounds strange, but I can imagine there's a lack of relatability sometimes. There's a lack of being able to form romantic connections. I mean, she has to lobotomize herself in order to have a bit of fun and have a sexual relationship. So that speaks volumes in terms of her being able to form like connections and even sexual connections, what she has to do to herself in order to be able to let go and let loose. And I love that scene when she's watching reality TV, she's eating junk food, and then she has sex with the Deep, and she's only able to relax and do that because she's quite literally removed part of her brain. That implies a bit of suffering, I think, in terms of her intelligence. So really, really interesting. Can't wait to see more of her. I want to touch on Ashley as well, who is another one of my favorite characters. Ashley is fascinating to me because why doesn't she leave? Why doesn't she leave? It's like a Stockholm syndrome. She is in survival mode constantly. She's always trying to get through. I also think she's quite attracted to the power in a way, but she doesn't really have any. This is the thing. She actually gets demoted in a way. She's like technically CEO still, but Sage is kind of running things, but she can't physically leave. She's so terrified of Homelander and the rest of them. Nobody respects her. She ends up being put on like the kill list and on the end, and she knows that. And again, rather than physically leave, she stays but injects herself with V so that they don't want to kill her, obviously, and so she has a bit of power. So again, I'm so interested to see what happens next season. But Ashley is so fascinating from a therapeutic point of view because she's so like attached to this really dangerous situation. A-Train even gives her the opportunity to leave and she says no, she said she can't. And it's like, why does she not have anything else in her life? It's very interesting to see her sexual relationships that she has where she is really powerful. She does a lot of like BDSM. She has partners where their kink is to be dominated. So she's like a dominatrix and things like that. And that gives her that power that she's craving. But in her actual job, she has none. So that satisfies her to an extent, but then she's not getting fulfilled in any other ways. And she's so ill with stress as well. She obviously lost all her hair. She's always like this, like frantic. She feels guilty about the choices that she's making, but then not guilty long enough to like change anything, like A-Train eventually does. She's like, no, she's still kind of loyal. So she's fascinating. I'd love to do like a deeper dive into Ashley because I just find her character and her motive so interesting. And I think there's so many different drives, again, of like fear, but also power, loyalty, trauma, keeping her stuck there, not having anywhere else to go, probably looking for love. And there's probably so much with Ashley. So yeah, really, really interesting, but we don't know enough about her for me to say more. But please let me know what you think about her character. She's also just really funny as well. And finally then, I want to talk about Ryan. Poor old Ryan. I say old, he's a kid. Ryan has gone through so much. And again, he goes through a lot this season. Now, Ryan is just trying to figure out who he is. He's a teenager, he's growing up, there's the part of him that's human and the part of him that is incredibly powerful. And he's learning as he goes, and he's being taught badly in terms of how to use his powers. And we see that play out when he accidentally kills someone because they're pushing him and pushing him and pushing him. It's fake, but it's real. And that he gets so overwhelmed and confused that when he does actually punch somebody, the person dies, which is also a sign of how powerful he actually is, which is quite scary and quite interesting. I feel for him because he's, again, similar to his dad, similar to Butcher as well. He's wrestling with the different parts of himself, and he genuinely cares about Butcher and Homelander, and they're using him to fight against the other. Butcher in particular doesn't necessarily have bad intentions, but he is a pawn. That in the final episode, they wanted to train Ryan to kill his dad. I mean, when I saw that, I was like, how do you expect him to react? I know it's a last resort. I know he's probably the only person that's powerful enough to do it and also can get close enough to do it. So it's a logical plan. But emotionally, how can you ask him to do that? And what did you expect his reaction to be? And how traumatizing to put him in that position when he already accidentally killed his mum. So yeah, I felt so sorry for him because I believe that he is scared of his dad, but loves his dad. And he has a lot of love and respect and feels close to his mum when he's with Butcher, and he doesn't know what to do, and he's trying to please everybody but also make himself happy and trying to figure out what he wants. And now, unfortunately, I think he's been pushed too much. And next season, I imagine, based on what happened at the end of this season, I wouldn't say more aligned with his dad, but definitely more aligned with his own power, because he's sick of probably suppressing it, because he's suppressing it, and he only lets it out when he's really pushed in that position. And that doesn't feel healthy. That's not a good feeling. So I imagine he's just going to let it happen now and be powerful. Whose side is he going to be on? How is that going to play out? It'd be really interesting to see about that. So to finish this video then, I just want to summarize the kind of overall themes that we saw this season. Firstly, I would say one of the big themes was what makes a person good and what makes a person bad. So I feel like Starlight is such a good example of that. A-Train is another really good example of that, of like technically he's been a really bad person and now he's trying to make amends. Starlight obviously has been kind of seen as good consistently, but actually has definitely made mistakes, and from people like Firecracker's point of view, isn't a good person at all and was actually quite mean. So, and also the nuances obviously with characters like Homelander and Butcher and other people as well. And for a character like Ryan, where is he going to fall into that? Is he going to be good or is he going to be bad? And even that in itself is so black and white. I totally get that, like, Homelander and the Deep and people are definitely bad people. It's not, this isn't me saying like there's more to them than, you know, there parts of them are good, but basically what I'm saying is it's a tricky game to put people in boxes, to be like they are completely good or they are completely bad, and it's just interesting to see how things actually play out. Another theme is the animalistic drives that people have, so the forces within, in a way, of what pushes people and motivates people. So for a character like the Deep, for example, his animalistic drive is to be respected, and that completely overrides everything else. Same with Homelander. There's parts of him that wants to heal and wants to be a good dad to Ryan, but his more animalistic drive is power and his need to be worshipped and his need for control and to be in the driving seat always. We saw with Butcher, he had definitely multiple drives, and unfortunately the one that completely took over is that he wants to put an end to this. His life is ending anyway, and his last ditch attempt with Ryan obviously failed, and so he gives in to his animalistic drive of revenge, of wanting it to be done, of doing anything possible. Whereas Hughie, obviously, the kind of counteracting that with let's be the better people, let's make the right decisions, let's do the harder route, let's do it in a way that we can still leave feeling like we're good people. So that was a massive theme. Another big theme of the show in general really is parenting. You see with all of the characters, or a lot of the characters, either don't have parental figures or have had quite bad parental figures. So ranging from a lack of parental figure for Homelander, for example, obviously Butcher was abused by his dad. Starlight had a very controlling mother, quite a narcissistic mother as well, kind of pushed her to be the person that she is, you know, wanting her to become Starlight, even injected her with V, which is obviously quite selfish. So parenting is kind of like an overall theme in the show anyway. The fact that people are searching to be parented as well, especially Homelander. He definitely is crying out for the love of a mother. And then again, Ryan is a good example where, bless him, he doesn't really have a stable parent and he's kind of searching for that. He's lost his mum and he tries to feel close to her. He wants to feel close to his dad, but struggles with that. Obviously, sometimes he's afraid of his dad, and he also sees a bit of a parental figure in Butcher as well, but again struggles with that dynamic because he doesn't fully trust Butcher. And finally, the theme of power, the theme of influence, the theme of being adored, being admired. There was elements of that need in all the characters. You could tell Starlight, Starlight in a way hates the attention, but she doesn't want people to hate her. She doesn't want people to be all in her business, obviously. She doesn't have it in the same way that Homelander does, or the Deep, but there is this need to be liked with the superheroes. It's just interesting. I wonder if something that happens with these soups is that they, because of what they've been given and what they've had to live with, there is a bit of an entitlement of like, well, people should care about me. People should be afraid of me. People should at the very least respect me, because they kind of all have that in common, but it just plays out in different ways. And what was really nice to see about A-Train's journey is for him, it's now playing out in a way of like, what can I actually do to help? It's not about kind of that public recognition. Yes, obviously he liked it when the kid kind of looked at him with that admiration, but he liked that because he did something real. He actually did help someone. So he's kind of letting go of that need to be adored and focusing more on what he can actually do. Whereas the others, apart from Starlight and obviously Kimiko, they're definitely more motivated to help people rather than, I don't think Kimiko cares about being adored at all, but that's because she doesn't think she deserves any kind of love. She's not looking to be worshipped. So I shouldn't say all the seeps, but a lot of the people that have been thrown into this world, there's part of them that wants to maintain that, to maintain being cared about. The Deep, he'll do anything just to stay in the 7. He completely disregards any of his other needs. Even Black Noir, the new one, I haven't spoken about him properly today, but he was really uncomfortable with what was happening, and then he sort of just went with it in the end. And I imagine, we don't really know a lot about his character, but I imagine it's because it's easier and better than not being in the Seven. Like, the idea of not being in the Seven is worse than the reality of the character being there, the attention, and being part of something. So this need for power in politics, this need for power in this world is so strong, and we see it played out with all the different characters, and maybe we're going to see that with other characters like Ryan now. Like, now that he's kind of leaning into his power, it'll be interesting to see what happens. So yeah, they were my overall thoughts on The Boys and this season and what happened with all the characters. I know I haven't spoken about every single person, like Newman, for example, who is such a great character. I haven't gone into everything, but I just didn't want this video to be even longer than it already is. So if you have got to this point, thank you so much for listening to me ramble on. I really hope you found it interesting. I'd love to know what you thought of the season, what you think of the characters, what you think is going to happen in season 5. Please give me a like if you did enjoy it. Please subscribe to my channel for more content like this. I tend to talk about TV shows quite a lot. I do reaction videos, and there's other content as well, all around mental health and therapy. Please give me a follow on Instagram as well. Thank you so much again for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.